Are you struggling with your resume? Let's be honest, I've never met anyone who has said, I can't wait to update my resume. Resume writing can be challenging for lots of reasons, including a desire to be humble, self-doubt, and questions about how to best convey our work history, particularly if we're making a change. This week, I talked with Fatemah Mirza, a master resume writer, about how to shift our mindset to write more effective resumes that best connect with our audience. She also talks about how to talk to your manager about a promotion or an internal change. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Fatemah. It is so wonderful to meet you today, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Before we jump in, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Of course. So my name is Fatemah, and I am a certified resume master with over 13 years of experience helping job seekers achieve their career goals. Sometimes that means finding you a new job. Sometimes that means helping you navigate those difficult conversations with your boss so that you can get the promotion and salary that you've been waiting for.
And what brought you to this work? Were you doing something else before?
Yeah, I was in the world of environmental engineering, and I started doing this just kind of randomly, like for friends, and I found out that I was quite good at it. Built a team of about 30. It's 30 of us now, and this is what we do every day. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Did you ever envision being a business owner? Like how was that transition for you?
That's a really good question. Like, I don't know if I'm that much of like, I don't know, like I do plan. Don't get me wrong, I do plan. I'm very like I create dashboards, I create 5-year goals. Like this is the project I'm working on, this is where I want it to be in 5 years. But as like for my life, no, like I haven't really like planned my life in that way, if that makes sense. It's more like, okay, this is the path that I'm going on. Let's plan this path as opposed to like, let's look at which path I want to pick, if that makes any sense.
It does, because I'm like that too. I'm definitely not a long-term planner. And I never had visions of starting my own business when I was working in corporate either. And then I wouldn't call myself necessarily impulsive, but
yeah, exactly. We're not impulsive. We're just, I don't know.
Action-oriented?
Yes, maybe we are impulsive, but we're in denial.
Yeah, that's very possible too. That could very well be it. So what do you think are some of the, let's call them challenges or opportunities, depending on how you want to frame them, when it comes to writing a resume? What do you think people most struggle with? Why is it that everyone hates doing their resume?
Because I think we've been taught that like talking about yourself is boasting and that it's icky, and it's not something that we encourage as a society. So I can talk on and on about my friend and how great they are and all their achievements and everything, and no one will bat an eye. But this is where the imposter syndrome kicks in, where we think like if we do the same for ourselves, we're going to be seen as bragging and self-obsessed and all of that. So this is like this very ingrained mindset that when we start writing about our accomplishments, like that creative part that just wants to write and share our ideas, and the part that's like responsible for kind of editing what we're putting out there, they come into conflict. So that makes writing a resume really difficult. Sometimes this is like your imposter syndrome kicking in, where you're like, I don't know, I can't take credit for doing that. That was my team. Or like, I just talked to this woman the other day, and she was like, I was doing a lot of my boss's work, but I didn't want to put that on my resume because I didn't think people would believe me. It's like things like that, where like a lot of that self-doubt comes in. And then there's another part of it where we're like, this sounds really stupid. Like, I don't want to write that. And the way we talk to ourselves. It's like really negative compared to like, I would never say these kinds of things to my little sister, for example, you know? And like, this, it's like, oh, it's just a resume. It's just like for jobs and professional, but no, it's you're putting yourself on a piece of paper, and it's so challenging and it's very difficult to do. So I think that's a lot of where like the mental hesitation comes from. But in terms of like where people actually mess up, I think people are not speaking enough to who's on the other side of the table. They're kind of putting too much of themselves on there instead of kind of looking at, oh, okay, these are their hiring needs and I need to speak to that.
Ooh, those are such important things. I want to split them up for a second, because I think you make a really good point about feeling like we're boasting. And I think part of it is humility. Part of it is, just sort of internal wiring, messaging that we've been given that it's not appropriate to brag, or that, we shouldn't think so highly of ourselves. I think sometimes for women in particular, we tend to be overly precise in how we think about ourselves. And so I see people all the time saying, well, would other people agree that I did this, right? And they don't want to overstate, or, to your point, take credit for something that was a group effort. And so there's a lot of overthinking that goes into it, as opposed to just sort of claiming ownership of different things that we've done throughout our careers. And so I want to just stick with that one for a moment and get your thoughts on what is lost if we aren't willing to embrace that, even though it can be hard, even though it may require stepping outside of our comfort zones or reframing our mindset. What happens if we stay too humble, or are not willing to claim what we have done in the past?
Well, like most tangibly, you're losing out on financial opportunities, right? Like you're losing out on promotions, you're losing out on high paid jobs. If you take a minute to really flex and brag on your resume, it becomes so much easier in the interview, and that becomes so much easier in the salary negotiation process. So you might get the same job, but it might be paying less because you haven't done a good enough job being like, you know what, this is me, and like owning that, So definitely the financial side of things. And then long term, like your satisfaction, like if you're a highly creative and capable individual, you're going to get spiritually burnt out if you're doing a job that's not taking advantage of everything you have to offer. If you're doing kind of those, there's nothing wrong with doing a mundane job if that's what you like that's good for you. That's going to make you feel spiritually fulfilled. But if that's not, and you can do more creatively and in terms of making a bigger impact on the world, you're going to miss out on those opportunities if you're not taking the time to be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm awesome. And people deserve to know that. You're doing a disservice to people who could benefit from you by not showing off, quite frankly.
I love that point. That's one I make all the time too, is that even though we think of this as self-serving, we're actually doing a service to others when we share this, because then they can bring this set of strengths and expertise into the organization and make it available to other people, right? When I know something well, then I can be a resource to the people on my team and support others in the skills and strengths that I have. So it's not just about, look at how wonderful I am, right? But it's about, how can I make the greatest contribution? And I think that leads to what you were talking about before too, of how we frame what we've done to best connect with the audience. Because if we make it about ourselves, we may miss an opportunity to really help them understand what we can do for them, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The first step to, having a great job search or having a great job is to ask lots of questions. What's the problem? What opportunities are you trying to capitalize on? These questions can be asked when you're reading the job description, all the way to when you are interviewing and trying to understand how to frame your interview answers. If you do that, you can speak according to that framework that you've created. And this helps you command a lot more, because you're coming in more as a consultant rather than, that defensive, like, please hire me, I know I can do a good job kind of vibe.
Yeah. So can you say a little bit more about the kinds of questions that we should be asking ourselves during this process? And then where do we get the answers? Especially, I think the interview feels like an obvious place, but a lot of times we're afraid to ask certain questions in the interview itself. Like, what are some resources we can access?
First of all, you should access your own guts and ask those questions. Like, I know it's hard and I know it feels weird to be like, why are you hiring for this position? You know, why was this position advertised to begin with? But these are the tough questions that you have to ask to first and foremost figure out how to sell yourself within those needs. And second, to see if that job is even a good fit for you. You know, I mean, it's a two-way street. You have to see why they're hiring and why that last person was let go. But if you want to come to the interview extra prepared and do a bit more research before you even begin the interview, you should be looking up what's going on with your industry. Like, how are economic trends impacting it? How are movements in like the supply chain? How are social movements impacting your industry? All of those things you should be aware of. Best way to stay at the forefront of this would be to join a professional association, because then you're going to kind of be on the cutting edge, especially if you're a senior professional. Reading up on scholarly journals in your space might be a great way to stay updated. So coming in with that, you know, like, hey, not only do I know what is going on with your company, I know how this industry is being impacted as a whole, and I know how to stay on top of that. That's a great vibe to be giving off.
I really like that too, of just kind of getting the bigger picture. And I want to go back to what you said about asking that question, why are you hiring? I think that's a really important one. I always recommend that too, because you want to know, was the person who was in this role before you fired? Was the person in this role before you like this really admired person whose shoes are going to be really huge to fill, right? Like, is the person still around for you to learn from, or had they left the company? And so that does have lots of implications for what your transition process will look like. And to your point, whether you want to do it at all.
Right. Yeah. It's a two-way street.
Yeah. So anything else that you think is really important for us to be thinking about as part of the strategy around preparing for either writing the resume or using the resume?
Your resume should focus on the job that you're trying to look for. So if this is very common now, a lot more common than it was back in the day, but a lot of you who are probably listening have had careers that have taken some transitions. Like, you've gone from one field to another. Maybe you're not doing what you studied. Maybe you had to take kind of like almost a demotion due to some personal circumstance. Like our resumes are not the cookie cutter, you know, one step in front of the other type of resumes that our ancestors had. So making sure that your resume speaks to that job and only includes content that is related to the job that you're looking for is really critical. If you've done kind of a little bit of everything, you can still mention your work history, but within each experience, make sure that it's customized to what you're looking for now.
That's a really important point. And I think for me, for my personal experience, people generally come to me because they want to make a change of some sort. And so there's often confusion or anxiety around how to tell that story, because they are often competing with people who have very particular experience that maps so closely to the job description that they feel like, oh, no one's ever going to even see that. It's not going to get through the applicant tracking system, or it's going to be really hard for people to make the connection between what I was doing before and what I want to be doing now. I wonder, and feel free to come at this question from whatever angle makes sense to you, because I know it's kind of a big topic, but I'm just thinking about, how do you effectively tell that story if, let's say, the bulk of my work was either in a different industry or in a different functional role? I feel confident that I can do this role, but I also feel like I'm not necessarily able to tell the story in writing in that way. Like, what's the most effective way to tackle that problem so that I'm adequately given the opportunity to convey that I'm a fit?
You have to, I think, get a second person's perspective because our work is so close to what we do that I think we get lost in the day to day. Like, we have a really hard time looking at the bigger picture and seeing how things translate to different industries. So, having like your spouse or your partner or a friend kind of read through your resume and help you connect the dots between what you've done and what you'd like to do is really important because you're going to be stuck in that, like, okay, I've been doing this daily, daily, daily. And a second person's perspective is going to be really important. If you want to do this yourself, I do have a blog on my resume. I have a blog on my resume. I have a blog on resumes on my website. It's called "Do Company Descriptions Go on Your Resume?" I believe it's something like that. If you Google for it, you'll find it. In it, I talk about the different components that make up the description under each experience, right? Who you worked with, what you did, which department you worked for, who you reported to, and whether to include that and how to tweak it depending on if you're transitioning or not. So let's say, for example, I mean, every situation is very, very different. So let's just throw some examples out there. Let's say you're going from sales to marketing. You were in sales and you're transitioning into marketing. Your experience should say like, yeah, I was a sales lead or whatever, but the actual content of what you're putting on there should focus as much on marketing as possible. So you can say, yeah, I overachieved on quota, but talk about how I overachieved on quota by creating relationships with the marketing team so that our sales collateral was really powerful. Or I delivered customer insights to the marketing team so that they can change the way we brand ourselves, that kind of thing, where you really showing that I am familiar with this world. I know how to speak this language. I have relationships with people in the space. Maybe stick in a recommendation from the marketing manager of your company, on your resume, like a couple lines that'll show that that you're respected in that space. It really depends, I think, from person to person. So having someone objectively look at your resume and having someone objectively look at the kind of job that you're trying to get into can really help.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we have very fixed rules in our mind for how a resume should be structured and what it should say. And sometimes I think people think it feels like cheating if I spend my position as a sales leader talking about the work I've done in marketing. But I think that's a mindset shift that we really need to make, because to your point, you want to be conveying the experience that best maps to what you will be doing, not necessarily what you've done in the past, right? That just kind of reinforces, if you're only talking about your sales experience, that doesn't bridge the gap between who you are today and where you want to be.
You were saying something earlier about helping people, like it's your job basically to help people understand how you can serve them. And this is one of those things. If someone who needs something in marketing is looking at all of your sales accomplishments, you're not helping them. They're not able to understand and bridge that gap. By helping connect those dots, you are doing them a service by saying, yes, this was my job title, and that connotates everything associated with a sales job title. However, I am showing you why this is still relevant and really helpful information for you to have. And you are helping them understand why you would be a great person to have on their team. That's first. The second thing is, I think a lot of us are fed resume advice that's really outdated, that made sense when everybody would work at one company for like 30 years and would retire with a pension and all of those things that are just not the reality anymore, especially considering, the crises that we've had in the past 3 decades with the dot-com bubble, with the Great Recession, with COVID. All of these things have put big bumps on our resumes. They have, made a upheaval out of our resumes. So people, when they look at resumes from the other side of the table, they understand, like, okay, you've had to have this transition, you've had to take maternity leave, you've had to take care of your spouse, like whatever it is. The other side of the table is also a lot more empathetic now. So a lot of this outdated, very structured and rigid resume advice that we're seeing, it probably doesn't apply. And you should be looking at things from that 2023 lens.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I do think that there are a lot of outdated beliefs. And that leads me to a couple of other questions. Number one is chronology, right? So let's imagine that let's take this example of sales and marketing. Let's imagine that I was doing more marketing in a role I held 15 years ago, and then I went into sales, and now I want to go back to marketing. How do I bring that past experience more front and center so people know, oh yeah, she has done this before? Is there, like, I guess, how important is it that your resume be chronological, and what opportunity is there to kind of refocus some of the older activities so that it's more visible?
I think it would be very difficult to make a believable case that experience that is 15 years old is still relevant and sharp, especially in the world of marketing where things have evolved so dramatically. I mean, what were we doing 15 years ago? Scrolls to each other. I'm just kidding. But I mean, what you want to do, like you can try lifting some of those accomplishments to, like, say, your summary section, but that's not enough. And it's not believable as, okay, Kim has what it takes to be a leader in this space. What you need to do is what I was mentioning earlier, is look at your most recent history and try to draw connections there. And if you absolutely cannot, you have to show your potential employer that your skill set is not stale, it's not out of date, it's still up to date, by taking courses or by signing up for special projects at your current work that help you demonstrate that skill. So if you're taking that earlier example, if you're just doing sales, you're not doing anything with marketing at all, but you did marketing like 15 years ago, talking about just that will make you run into the biggest bias that there is in the job world today, which is ageism. This person is too old and they're too outdated. And this is harsh, but it's the reality of what some of the older job seekers are facing. And it's also illegal, but it's very difficult to prove that you're running into age-related discrimination. So before making a jump and quitting your job and looking for your next job, talk to your boss candidly about your goals to transition into marketing. Ask for projects that help support your goal in your resume so that you have something to talk about, so that you have more recent experience. So you're not talking about, what were you doing in 2005? Imagine you're in, like, I don't know, the mortgage sector, and you're talking about mortgage experience from 2008. Like, no, that's gonna look really bad. You have to talk about the new codes and laws and everything and how you can navigate that. It's just really important to show that relevant experience from recent times.
I think that's such a good point. And you touched on this a little bit about how times have changed, but I'm curious, what do you do with a resume gap, right? Like, do you actually account for that time? Do you, do you just keep the dates, maybe I took 2 years off, and so I've got one position that's up until 2020. And then, my next position started in 2022, and just hope that no one asks me about it? Or like, what do I do with that? Is it better to name it on the resume or to just gloss over it?
So with a gap, the concern that an employer has is, I'm concerned that she left on bad terms and was unemployable for some reason. Maybe she went to jail, there's all kinds of situations that a pessimistic employer would be thinking. The second concern is, I'm concerned that in this time her skills deteriorated, right? So you have to address both of those in that gap, especially if that gap is one you're currently experiencing. If this gap was back in 2008, no big deal, because everyone knows that, unemployment was really high in that period, whatever, that's no longer relevant to your capabilities today. But if this is something that you're experiencing right now, how you talk about it depends a lot on what was going on. If you just took a gap to go to school, you can put your, schooling there. If you took a gap because someone in your family died and you were doing all of their asset management, how you talk about that is also different. And it depends on the industry that you're going into. I have 2 detailed blogs on this topic. If you just Google employment gap career tuners, you'll find both. One is on how to talk about gaps on your resume, and the other is interviews. And I break down pretty much every scenario that I've seen in my 13 years in this space, from going through divorce and, needing time off in order to engage in custody disputes, all the way to having depressive episodes that lasted several years and needing time off to recover from that, to cancer. Like, there's so many things I've seen with job seekers that dictated that they need to take a gap. I've talked about all of them. How do you discuss each in the interview, on the resume, depending on what your scenario was and your level of comfort?
That's wonderful. Thank you. And we'll put a link to your blog in the show notes as well. This is, maybe another thing that you've addressed in your blog, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I've been hearing this more and more lately. We know that people have been leaving their jobs because they're no longer willing to tolerate some of the cultural factors that are part of their work experience. So they're leaving because they don't have a good relationship with their boss, or they don't like some of the things that are going on in their company. And they're not quite sure how to tell the story of why they're leaving, right? And we've all heard, don't badmouth your employer, don't say anything bad. When people are leaving, they're usually leaving because they're not happy, or they see a better opportunity somewhere else, unless they've been recruited and this just sort of opened their eyes to a new opportunity. They've chosen to look for a new job because things aren't perfect where they are, right? So what's your advice for how to talk about leaving a job because you are unhappy without saying something that's going to raise a red flag for the...
So you want to look at the job description that you're targeting and draw some parallels between your experience. And you're probably like, what? That doesn't answer the question at all, but it does. So let's say I'm leaving my job because my boss sucks, which would be funny because I'm the boss. Let's suppose I'm sick of my own self. Like, so rather than talking about how awful Fatemah is, what I would say is, I've been doing a little bit of email marketing at work and I really love it. However, I see that it's a bigger portion of the job description that you guys are advertising for. I would say email marketing takes up 20% of my workload. Whereas, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you guys are hiring someone to do this like 80% of the time. And this is something I'm so passionate about. This really drew me. I really wanted to apply because this is something that I think I could really excel at if I was able to focus on it more. Something like that. Now, you don't talk about your boss, you don't talk about anything, you're just strictly positioning yourself as the ideal candidate. If the job that you're leaving, like you're just leaving, like it's just been like 3 months and you're like, oh my God, my boss is awful, like I need to leave, then you need to show that you're leaving on good terms. That has to be part of your answer. So some component of, I achieved everything that I was hired to do, would be wise. Nothing like, oh, the boss is bad, or the job isn't as advertised. None of that, because they are not going to be able to relate to what you're saying at all. They're going to relate to your manager or to your boss because that's who they are, right? That they're on the other side of the table. So something like, I was initially hired to redo our Instagram presence. I was able to achieve that, and the company is now transitioning onto Facebook. I love Instagram, so I would like to continue doing that. That's why I applied for your job, because I see Instagram marketing as a big part of your job, something like that. Obviously, it's not going to be that specific, but drawing parallels to that answer will really help you. If possible, achieving, a letter of recommendation from someone at work, if it's not your boss, a vendor, a client, a colleague, someone you mentored, copying a line from that and putting it on your resume can really show that you're leaving behind good relationships and you're not burning that bridge.
And I think that reinforces the theme of just easing any doubts they might have, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to take a chance that they're going to hire you and then you're going to be a difficult employee, or you're going to leave them hanging, or something bad is going to happen, right?
Right.
Yeah. Can we spend a couple minutes talking about, because we've been talking about sort of moving outside of the company, but you also mentioned having the conversation with your boss about getting a promotion, or, just kind of getting what you deserve. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see as some of the challenges there, navigating the internal promotion process?
Yeah. The worst case that I've seen is if someone is, their boss is like, this person is delusional. Like she thinks she deserves a promotion, but she's like barely, pulling her weight. You don't want that. So you want to make sure that your boss actually thinks that your performance is good. So before engaging in this kind of conversation, asking for a performance evaluation to see where you might be lacking and working on that is the first step before anything else. If you're sure you're a star player and you do need, like, you do check off all of your boss's boxes, then you can ask for a promotion. You can say like, I've basically, introducing that, okay, I've achieved all of this, I'm really excited about the implications of the work that I've done already. I would like to continue excelling, but I would like to do a little bit more. So I'm wondering if there's a potential for a promotion where I can exercise X, Y, and Z leadership skill. So this, again, should tie closely with the job description that you're aiming for. You might not be able to find one if you're looking for something internally, but quickly Googling, whatever that job title is and what they do, and showing that you're ready for that is the way to move forward. If you absolutely want to guarantee that you're going to get a promotion or that you're going to be making more, you can use you can use an offer to as leverage. Like, let's say, you love your job, but someone reached out to you on LinkedIn and they're like, hey, we'll offer you the same job, but with the 20% raise. So you can take that, you can go to your boss and you can say, I got this offer and I'm not that interested in it because I really love the culture here. However, the finances do dictate that I take this somewhat seriously. So I'm wondering if there's any way that you can match this. So you're not coming across as like, hey, I'm going to leave unless you're going to pay me 20% more. It's more like this is the reality of my financial situation, that I cannot ignore this. This is too large of a sum to ignore. Is there some way we can come closer to this if we can't match it? If we can't match it, if you can't come closer to it, can you extend me like a learning budget so that I can take some courses and stuff like that? Like, negotiate for whatever you can if you're not getting what you want.
I think that's an important reminder too. Yeah, there's more to the negotiation than just the salary itself.
Right.
Excuse me. I like that you mentioned a learning budget. And I also think it's important, to your point, to have this conversation sooner rather than later. Mm-hmm. So we can be on the same page. If I ask for a promotion, at the very end of the promotion cycle, that doesn't give me time to fill in any gaps. And if I have no idea what your expectations are or your assessment of my work, then it's almost too late at that point for me to do anything about it. Whereas if we start the conversation early, then we can be working together on a roadmap that gets us to that place over time.
Definitely. Because you don't know if your boss thinks your performance is lacking unless they explicitly spell that out. So you want to make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that we haven't covered that you think is important to share here?
I think it's really important to look at your internal resources as well before making an external move. I mean, you might think, oh, I work at a really small company, or we don't have the budget for that. Resources doesn't always mean, paid training and promotions and raises. Sometimes it means being able to work on a really cool, high visibility project that's going to look amazing on your resume, that's going to open a lot of doors for you into your next move. So really kind of network internally a lot, be aware of what people are working on and why. Always ask why, what's the point of that? Why are we doing this? Why? And you'll be able to connect dots, potentially identify redundant processes and head projects to eliminate them. And all kinds of good things can happen when you look internally. So that's one big tip that I would like to leave you with.
I think that's a great one. I think, a lot of times we come to the conclusion that we're not getting what we need right now. And our immediate thought is, let me go outside, let me find something different. But it's a lot easier if you're already in a company where people know you, to be able to just expand your options internally.
Right. You have that credibility. People trust you. People know your face. These things really help.
You're right. And this has been such a great conversation. I would love to ask you where other people can, or where people can find you if they want to learn more about your work and the resources that you mentioned.
Yeah, you should check me out at careertuners.com. That's careertuners.com. And you can also there on the free resources tab, grab what I like to call my salary doubling resume cheat sheet. In it, I dissect a case of someone who was able to double their initial offer just by showcasing their strengths on their resume. We think that negotiation is just something that happens after the interview process, but it actually starts way before. If you can show that the ROI for hiring you is going to be great from that very first impression, that is going to trickle into all aspects of your job search process.
Thank you so much, Fatemah. It's been great to talk to you. This has been such a powerful conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.